it's a very sad day. It's the end of a really important era, and it's very sad how quickly we're losing that connection with the Second World War. It felt like it wasn't that long ago that we said goodbye to the last of our World War One veterans, and now we're losing our World War Two veterans as well. So it is a very sad day.
Were you able to meet and talk with many of the Rats of Tobruk over the years?
I did have the great pleasure of meeting several of the Rats of Tobruk over the years, and it was quite a remarkable experience. I'll always be grateful for that, because there's nothing like hearing about these experiences in the words of the men that were there. So we can read as many history books as we like or watch documentaries, but there's nothing like speaking to these blokes. And I was greatly fortunate through my work as a historian and my podcasts and other things that I do, that I was able to speak to these men and hear this incredible story in their own words.
Yeah, so explain for us how the Rats of Tobruk got their name and the significance of what they did.
Well, Tobruk was a really important port city, and during the North Africa campaign, the Germans were forced to bring all their supplies in on an incredibly long supply route because they didn't have a major port. And so they were desperate to capture the city of Tobruk, which would give them access to the sea. And the Australian 9th Division was holding the city of Tobruk in 1941 and were completely surrounded by the Germans. And the Germans had laid siege to the city and were attacking it every day in an effort to wrest it away from the Australians. And the Germans rather derisively referred to the men in Tobruk as rats. They were holding out in Tobruk like rats in a trap. And the Aussies, pretty quickly, as Aussies quite commonly do, adapted that as a badge of honour. So rather than an insult, they took it as a credit to the great job they were doing holding out. So that's where we get the name, the Rats of Tobruk.
And what were they able to do there in Tobruk strategically?
Well, it was really quite remarkable. They managed to hold out against the might of Rommel and his Afrika Korps and some of the elite Nazi forces fighting in North Africa from April until August 1941. And even after then, when they were relieved by British units, some Australian units stayed in Tobruk facing the horrors of the German onslaught right up until the siege was lifted in December. So it's a remarkable chapter of our Second World War history, an incredible act of defiance and bravery. The conditions in Tobruk were quite appalling, and the fact that these Aussies were able to hang on for as long as they did is really quite remarkable.
And why was North Africa so important in World War II?
It was a colonial outpost of the Italians. There was a lot of Italian interests in North Africa. North Africa, Egypt in particular, was the bastion of the British Empire as it was at the time, and most importantly, the Suez Canal was there. So for the Germans and the Italians, capturing Egypt, capturing the Suez Canal, and knocking Britain out of that very strategically important part of Africa was a key recipe for success in the Second World War. And so acts like Tobruk, like the defiance of the Allies in North Africa, great battles like El Alamein that came afterwards, were really important in stopping the Nazis and the Italians in North Africa.
Someone was quoted today as saying Tobruk now risks becoming a ghost of the past. Do you believe there's a risk of that?
I don't think Tobruk specifically, because I think it's one of our most well-known chapters of the Second World War. But that comment does reflect the fear that our knowledge of World War II and other wars in general will start to slip as time goes on. And it is a genuine risk. We have now lost the last of those personal connections with Tobruk. And sadly, as we lose more World War II veterans, we'll start to lose connections with those other chapters as well. So it's why it's important that on days like today, we do stop and remember. It's why it's important that we read books and study and form our own impressions of what went on in the Second World War, because it's a really important chapter in Australia's history, and it would be a tragedy if we forgot about it in the future.
Yeah, so go into that in a bit more detail for us. Why is it so important that we remember these campaigns and honour the people who served in them?
Well, I think it's really important, Joe, because it wasn't that long ago. You know, we're talking, as we said today, we lost our last Rat of Tobruk. So this may seem like history that belongs in the past, 80 years since the fighting of the Second World War. But it wasn't that long ago, and it's remarkable how much the world has changed in that time. And that wasn't by accident. That wasn't because the world just sort of evolved. It was by the efforts of people like the Rats of Tobruk to preserve freedom and liberty, and to do their bit to make sure we lived in a better world. And there's been a really conscious effort since the Second World War to try and reshape the world to a better place. And I mean, there's questions about how well we're going with that, but I think in general you'd say that we live in a fairly peaceful time. We live in a time that is a reflection of the sacrifices made during the Second World War. And it's important that we remember that the Second World War was the start of this period, which in general has been a fairly safe and secure time for the world.